After the Iranian strike on the American tanker, an immediate order was issued to deploy the USS Theodore Roosevelt aircraft carrier to sea. The moment the command reached the ship, preparations began without delay. The soldiers assigned to the carrier were already at combat readiness. They grabbed their gear, formed up, and began boarding the ship through the gangways. These troops would later be distributed across the escort cruisers that would accompany oil tankers through the Strait of Hormuz, protecting them from Iranian missile attacks. Dockside, the mooring lines were cast off from the bollards, one by one. The large cargo ramp on the side of the hull began lifting and locking into its closed position. On the lower decks, soldiers sorted and distributed supplies, ammunition, rations, equipment, moving crates to their designated storage compartments. In the anchor room, sailors hauled in the heavy anchor chains link by link using the windlass, coiled the mooring hawsers, and stowed everything for sea. The chief petty officer in charge of the anchor detail reported to the bridge that the forward section was secured and the ship was ready to move. The bridge relayed the order to the harbor tugboats. The carrier was cleared to depart. The tugs pushed and pulled the massive hull away from the pier and guided it through the harbor channel. Once clear of the port, the tugboats cast off and the carrier proceeded under its own power into open water. Within hours, escort cruisers and destroyers moved into formation around the carrier, taking their assigned screening positions. These ships were armed and ready not only to protect the carrier group, but also to strike Iranian military targets if ordered. On the flight deck, preparation of the fighter aircraft was already in full swing. Maintenance crews moved between the jets, mounting air-to-air and air-to-ground missiles onto the wing pylons. Each weapon was secured, the electrical connections tested, the arming pins inserted with red safety flags. Mechanics inspected every aircraft. Panels opened, hydraulics checked, engine intakes cleared, landing gear inspected, avionics powered up and cycled through diagnostic tests. On the runway section of the flight deck, F-35 Lightning II fighters were being put through pre-flight testing. Pilots sat in the cockpits, running the engines through power checks, while ground crew watched the exhaust, listened to the turbines, and monitored the readings relayed from the aircraft's systems. Control surfaces were deflected through their full range. Radar systems were activated and confirmed operational. Each F-35 that passed its checks was signed off and moved to a standby position, ready for launch. The soldiers being transported to the escort cruisers prepared for departure. Their V-22 Ospreys were already parked on the aft section of the flight deck, rotors folded, ramps down. The troops moved fast, climbing the ladderways from below deck, crossing the flight deck at a jog, and filing into the Ospreys. They took their seats, strapped in, and the crew chiefs confirmed head count. The rotors unfolded, engines started, and the Ospreys lifted off one after another, heading toward the cruisers where the soldiers would take up their escort duties, protecting the oil tanker convoys through the strait. On the forward catapults, fighter pilots were strapping in and running through their final checklists. The catapult crew hooked each aircraft to the shuttle. The jet blast deflectors rose behind the engines, and the pilots pushed to full military power. One by one, the catapults fired, and the fighters shot off the bow of the carrier. FA-18 Super Hornets and F-35s climbing steeply and banking toward their assigned headings. Each aircraft cleared the deck, and the next one was already rolling into position. The launches continued in a steady rhythm. One of the escort cruisers in the formation received a fire mission. The vertical launch system hatches opened along the forward deck. Tomahawk cruise missiles began firing from the cells, each one erupting in a burst of flame and white smoke, climbing vertically before tipping over and accelerating toward the horizon. The missiles were targeted at Iranian military installations. One after another, they left the ship, each one on a different flight path to a different target. The combat mission continued. More fighters launched from the carrier deck and headed east toward the Middle East. The cycle did not stop. One aircraft launched, the next taxied into place, catapult reset, launch again. The air wing was being fed into the fight as fast as the deck crew could turn the catapults around. Upon reaching Iranian airspace, an FA-18 Super Hornet crossed the border and entered enemy territory. Iranian air defenses in the area had already been degraded by earlier strikes. The pilot identified ground targets through the targeting pod. Iranian military vehicles, equipment, and positions visible on the display screen in the cockpit. The pilot selected a target, locked on, and released a guided munition. The bomb fell, guided itself to the coordinates, and detonated on the target. The pilot banked, acquired the next target, and struck again. Methodical, precise. One target after another. The fighter worked through its assigned target list, expending its ordnance on Iranian military assets on the ground, then turned back toward the carrier to rearm and refuel for the next sortie.